Just so comfortable crickets, aren't we? Just sitting there, just going along. Cricketeering. It's not going to cut it. Cricketeering's not going to cut it. We're all going to make excuses into oblivion. And thank you to at least one listener to ask about writing that letter to the CDC, which I gave you all the words to. I hope that got followed through. I didn't get too much follow through. Certainly didn't get anybody telling me a better way. And so, I sit here with the hope beyond hope, change beyond change, that everyone will stop being crickets and get on with what we need to do, the way it needs to be done, and without excuse. Well, excuse goes away as soon as we get involved. More and more and more, and like I said, the more we don't do, the more they get around things with us, and it just becomes more and more difficult. Even before me here, when it was stated that if we don't, the only few that do get active are the ones that are easily picked off, is exactly what I've been saying over and over. I find it amazing that people keep coming around to the same old ideas, and that's because there's really going to be only one way this works out. Or not, I suppose. I guess we can go that way. There's always the duality, always the choice. There's always the road, the one you didn't take. The thing is you got to take a road. The interesting problem is those that know you better than yourself made it so if you don't respond, you take their road. And before I get too much farther off, let me get to the tabs, because some of this stuff leads me off a little bit. I want to get back to the discussion, as I was pointing out last week, on the stakeholder. I said I can attach it to the stalking horse. It is that crime against us that acts it has authority just because it can affect you. I hope you appreciate what they're saying and telling us about this. These that are doing this encroachment, because even though I can attach it to something simple, like we can focus on a term called sustainable development, the encroachment of international codes, model business codes, and all this other nonsense. This can be viewed in just about any other tactical sense. Don't think the military is not using it on you in battlefield America, because they are. So when I bring up these things, I try not to talk in too narrow an avenue, so that we don't see that it's attachable. All these things are there for us to see, and they require our response. They don't require, any excuse is not the answer. But here I've got to let you know, because I didn't receive quite at all any email, any more than I think one or two emails in this subject matter, just getting you to write a letter. Stand up for yourself, at least that much. That Yahoo denies surveillance claims amid privacy outcry was a message that came from Yahoo right after it was discussed, that a report came out that said that the Yahoo administration had actually did the dirty deed of looking at all their users' emails, us users, and they came out to say, no, we didn't. At first they blamed it on Russia. Putin did it. And so here's the big nonsense that goes on. But at any rate, so right before that, I've been having trouble on my Yahoo account. And so here's the evidence that I'm not perfect. I still have a Yahoo account. Yes, I do. And I've been having to figure out what to do to move myself over to a better place. I've been looking for encryption stuff. But I also had a program. I didn't want to lose all the emails. And I finally got the program I found to download through an IMAP system to all the emails. I finally got it to work, and just this week. So I definitely did that. And though there may be an independent reason why I'm not getting some emails, they're being kicked back. So those of you that are getting kickbacks, a couple of you got through again, and thank you for allowing me to know that. I don't know whether or not that's Yahoo or whether or not we're having a local ISP problem. And as I'm saying that, I hope I'm getting out. If I'm not, and if I'm getting out spotty and you can hear me now, I'll be putting everything to the broadcaster, and I won't stop the broadcast because I don't have a connection or a proper line. I'm going to just get it to the broadcast so I get the proper file. That seems to be much more important, I found out over doing this for many years. Yahoo is claiming that they didn't. It was misleading, the report that said that they looked at all the people's emails to try and help out the government. So those of us are sitting in the Yahoo, you're taking these free services, and they were never so free. Again, we all learn as we do this stuff, but I'm also going to be looking for a new email at some point that it fills what I need to see. I'm not quite sure what's available. I would like to have it encrypted on the hard drives wherever it's stored, but I'd like to have IMAP attachment access so that I can also get the emails off, because a lot of the stuff I do has to do with, the stuff I talk about behind the woodshed in earnest. So, and we don't want anybody to know that kind of stuff, at least going in, because if you take away your surprise, the enemy knows how to deal with it or make it look like they can deal with it, which I tell you is really the main thing you are up against. Just understanding the direction they'll try and take to make it look like you weren't effective. When I can tell you, coming by the fact in the law, you're never going to be ineffective. It's just that they'll try and get people to be convinced that you weren't. So Yahoo's been having a problem with their surveillance. Whether or not they do or don't, the point is that we're learning again this digital. Remember, quiet weapons, silent weapons for quiet wars. I have that at the bottom of my document, my broadcaster. It's the place they have you plug in all these free things, or the free things they can shove on you, like Windows 10. They're there to get us into the fold, and it takes some energy and work to try and keep ourselves distinct and separate. And on Ron Stevens' Rock the Boat broadcast, I'm happy to hear that there's some more energy going together to get us an independent line together, this conference, because I told you a long time ago I stopped using Skype. I told you why Microsoft bought Skype for so much money, and it's turned out to be exactly that. Writing's all over the walls on this thing, and so and a lot of people say, well, I don't care. Well, see, I do. I have a lot of things that I do that I don't want these people to know. And even so, why would I want to give them the satisfaction anyway? And if that sounds like I'm cutting my nose to spite my face, maybe I am a little bit, but this is all just privilege to us in a way. So I have my right to choose those forks in the road, and I've decided to be pretty hard line on these things. And yes, we're collecting up different P2P encrypted systems, so I have a couple of them. And I was hoping people would be moving over to them and readapting all their systems over to these encrypted systems. So they partly can't, see, if you're encrypted, they also can't know who's hooking up, where. And they can't really interfere as easily either, that I'm surprised that a lot of the so-called alternative areas and medias and the so-called truth seekers haven't really been just thumbing their nose at all this. But that's neither here for me to decide. I don't have to. I have a direct encoder to a server that I get the broadcast out, so I don't have to worry about all that, but it makes it difficult to contact and discuss with other hosts these concepts, which can be very important if we can possibly get it together. That said, who's going to listen? I'm not talking just listen. They all listen. There are lots of everyone's listening for entertainment. I'm talking about actually using the information. I don't understand. I look at that. I'm now getting lost in this thought. I don't know if people appreciate the quality of information that they can get from a few of us hosts, that you don't have to learn this stuff anymore. The only problem I can see with that is you also don't have the experience to know that it works, and so you give it a big dismissal and an excuse. But you don't have to go through the billions, I'm sure it's billions now of words, letters for certainly that I've had to go through to see what I see. And I don't think it's a clouded or I don't think it's a distorted view. And if it is a distorted view, there's nobody in the matrix that can straighten that out. Remember, and I see this theme coming back. The Matrix is not a movie. Matrix is not a movie. Whether or not you want to go esoteric and say the scientists are going to go study it and find out if we're not in a virtual reality or not is irrelevant. You're working through a reality that is the Matrix that you don't understand. It's transparent to most of you. And I'd have to almost put myself on the line to say all of you. What I don't see, I don't know. But I can see a whole lot more of what I have a different vantage point to see all what you all don't see. What you all excuse away. What you all fabricate to become an occlusion to your own self. And I guess I'm still now getting into I'm still a little bit raw about not everybody stepping up to write a simple letter to even defend themselves and be a little stick in the spoke against one of these agencies that thinks that they got all power, and I know and for absolute certain they don't when the mass of people comes against them. It just comes through a different venue. I'm not saying I agree with it. I'm not saying that I want to deal with it, but that's a reality you have to deal with. You have to deal with an occupier. There's just a trespasser come on your place, a trespasser get in your face, you have to deal with it. And if you don't, they deal with you on their terms. It's that simple. So, Yahoo's having some trouble. Want to let you know in case you're getting kickbacks. There's nothing I can do about that. It may not even be Yahoo. It may be the ISP that we have. We're having some terrible problems, at least loading stuff up this morning. I was wondering if I was even going to get online, but here we are. So there you go. Go move on now to the next thing on the list. As you see, this place they have you plug into can be used for the system to collect you up and bring you in. They get you to get into the free. They get you to plug into free, when in fact it's really just a trap. Evil doers on Twitter, beware. You can now be served lawsuits in a tweet. If you didn't understand this whole digital world, this matrix that they've got us even stepping ourselves into, even the one we feel is existing here, they will get you to into a place that they then justify the ability to give you notice that's lawful in a legal system. You know, I just made an oxymoron there, but that's okay. Those of you that know about it, untangle it. Those of you that don't know what I just said. Evildoers on Twitter, beware. They can use social media now to give you so-called legal notice. And now you start to find out how minimal their ability to come out, how thin their veil is to reach through the veil that you can't go through unless you know some things, and reach in and grab you and pull you on the other side of the curtain. They can get you to Twitter. Now, the story does go on to say, and I won't go be reading it more, or even what happened. The fact is that they did have to try multiple other more normal ways, and this is just the list of ways. If you look in the rules of evidence for the processes of the court, all they have to do is get you notice. They've dropped a lot of the barriers at all. They just go through the steps. They try to get you personal service. They call it personal. That means that if they serve you that you are the person, they have subject matter, personam jurisdiction over you. If you don't fight that, then you agree. They have personam jurisdiction. That's about all they actually need. Subject matter jurisdiction would come next. And so if you don't go through and answer in these certain times that they give you, between the time you're served and the time that you're supposed to so-called appear, you don't do the pre remedies, then you're stuck. You're stuck with what the status is you agreed to by your silence. So when I'm telling you this thing, you can't use any excuse. I'm telling you it's universal. They can come after you now in the Twitter. And I saw that, and I just about wanted to just pull my Twitter account. And I didn't, and as I'm thinking about it, I'm not sure what they'd have to sue the entity called Behind the Woodshed then, wouldn't they? And that doesn't exist. So I've got my own thought about how this works. It doesn't mean it's going to keep an evildoer against me, falsely characterizing me as an evildoer. And we have that proof in my co-owner of my mine and my friend. They did that to him. We called them out on it. We did the remedies. It's a standstill right now because you got no law enforcement in this country. When you finally come to these terms and it's reality, you'll realize what I've been saying and why I'm a little bit miffed that no one can send even a simple letter to the CDC to say something. The words of which I gave you as well. I can't get this. I just don't get this. But I see people doing things. They start to roll at least they're unbuttoning the cuffs, and I'm hoping that the resolve is to roll those cuffs back till they roll them up and they get their sleeves rolled back, and then they start getting to work. That's the thin thread, the thin fingernail hold I have on all this right now, to tell you the truth, folks. Drives me nuts. Anyway, here we are. If you didn't think that they give you digital access so that they can find you, this is why you shouldn't ever give your information on the internet about who you are, what you do, and these kinds of things. It's going way beyond just surveillance. This is digital connections to bring you into that digital world where you have the digital money and all this other stuff, so-called money. This is the way they start to control your life, without which you have no so-called undead life, because it's all legal entities, and you haven't developed your own external lawful condition, which is right there for you to take if you would just do it. But see, you can't write a letter for yourself in self-defense of this monster that's after us, this beast. I don't have much hope for any of us. Even those of us like myself that can out this in just a couple letters. It's not hard. They just start ignoring you, and there's not enough of us, even the oath keepers. This is a shame on the so-called oath keepers. Don't even know what the real problem is. They focus on, and I think that's the whole PSYOP thing. I think it's all a misdirection. If the oath keepers actually knew what their oath meant and what it was supposed to do, they wouldn't be acting like they are. They wouldn't get upset with me, and their leaders upset with me, not the ultimate leader, the local leaders, upset with me when I told them they didn't need to act the way they did if someone else acted better. And they disabuse their own authority because they're not intelligent enough to figure out what their authority in that enforcement is. Notwithstanding, they don't understand the jurisdiction they took an oath to. And so I talk about all this. I don't know why people aren't picking it up. And if you are picking it up, I don't know why you're not using it. And if you're not using it, I don't know what to say about it. We're all available to that ring in our nose, and we're willing to keep it in there. In fact, we're willing to put it in like this Twitter stuff. Now, I haven't made a full decision on Twitter. Yahoo now, whether they deny it or not, we knew it was there. Well, the information comes out that they're doing it. We knew it. So now we got to make that important. Twitter the same way. All of them. Facebook. So what are we going to do? We're going to have to create that independent network system that we go through, that we talk to each other directly. And are we willful to do so? I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, just watching people not get off Skype has really been kind of an amazing thing to me. It's your decision. I can't stop all that, and I know everyone has their reasons why they continue. But in light of the danger now, well, how do you like that? Skype, through Skype and Microsoft, you sign in, and the next thing you hear is a voicemail from a clerk of a court. You've been summoned to our court. And when you look at the Kim.com case, you look at, I wasn't even involved in that town, or that city, or that country, and I'm being summoned into their court? Across the globe? If you don't understand the nature of this global governance kind of nance thing. Writing's on the wall, folks. I don't know what to say. I look at these little stories, and I don't hear anybody talking about this stuff except for my eyes see this. I'm telling you, these are danger. Will Robinson. Is there even one Will Robinson out there? No, there was a William Roberts, and he's passed. So I'm not speaking to him, although we could sure use his daily lessons still. Though I don't know how many people would understand how to apply what he said. So I got to keep moving because I start thinking about this, and I really don't know what I'm doing here. I really don't. Federal judge overturns ban. We talk about being cited into court and summons. Well, you get there, and maybe you get this to happen. Maybe you get a little bit of so-called justice, and yet I look at it and see injustice. Federal judge overturns ban on openly carrying guns in public. Like, I don't even know why that was a question right off the top. The ruling also rejects assault weapon ban, caliber restrictions on long guns, and heavy handgun tax and registration requirements. Well, you read that, and you say, this is a great victory for the Second Amendment. What have I told you before? In the Second Amendment, it says, shall not infringe. I think, in my mind, says that was an antecedent right. That was an antecedent necessity. I'm putting it up one more notch. The judicial officers of any, whether you call it the corporate state or the de jure people's government, have no judicial authority to decide this matter. They shall not interfere. No, you hear them interfere, and no, I don't see any oath keepers actually stopping that one. That they're making a decision at all on this is a violation in my mindset. And it is set. But they say later on in this report, where everyone's, not everybody, whoever, the quintuple victory for the Second Amendment, right? There's no victory. They also say, that although we have no caliber restrictions, we're going to limit you to 10 rounds. Now, how are you supposed to fulfill the purpose of the Second Amendment, folks, in its ultimate? What I'm trying to avoid is that we go, but is there for the people nonetheless. And it's not there because we ordered it up. It was there because all peoples will rise up against those that occupy them, and it's their necessity to do so. That they just dropped it in this thing to make sure that people were quelled in that idea that they would rise up. They won't. We learned the truth about that in Lincoln's time. People haven't figured that little answer out. But where in the Second Amendment did it say that when you're going to fulfill to fulfill your obligations and duties and your necessities under the Second Amendment, that you can do it in a 10-round clip? It is really astonishing to me that this judge so-called even has a say and then made that say, where she says that there's also rejection on the ban of guns, assault weapons. What was interesting is how they go and mealy-mouth this thing, and where she identifies, well, actually, the things, the accoutrements that you add to a rifle, an arm, actually make them more accurate. And therefore, that was a counter to what the state was saying, which would bring the state's power to bear to infringe. But yet the statement is, thou shalt not infringe, and thou shalt not infringe. It says, shall not infringe. And why? Why was that? Was to stop the very people, the tyrants, the cockistocracy that would rise up around us that we were obligated to take out. If they didn't finally listen to reason and our law and our impositions and take away our remedies, just like we are today, just like we're very close to. I think we have some, but it's just not enough people to assert them. We'd rather go rah BLM, which for me was Bureau of Land Management. Now it's Black Lives Matter. I listened to that. I said, hey, they're co-opting a whole section of law by changing that name. BLM, Black Lives Matter. What happened to Bureau of Land Management and all that crime? No one talks about that. That's against everyone. But no, we get these judges that talk about the Second Amendment like they have a right. And my first discussion is this: where does it say you have a judicial right to interpret the Second Amendment? It says shall not infringe. And nobody has that word in their mouth that would step up to make this conversation. No, we allow the judges and the attorneys, both bar members, to take advantage of this and not put our foot down about that. See, the right of a necessity for self-defense, if you can say it that way, is ours prior and antecedent to government. It took us all these years before we got to the United States, before we got to that point. Although it was kind of missed that in the olden day, the day of the feudal system, that most everyone carried some sort of a sword. It's the equivalent to our technology as having an arm, which they redefined at the federal level as a firearm, which is a particularly defined set of devices which are nothing what we buy in the stores. And then they threw it underneath a commerce condition, which is back to your administrative nonsense, where you're inside something that's not constitutional. Question in the RLM chat earlier was, could the Ammon Bundy situation, why can't they force the Ammon Bundy to be able to read something out of the Constitution? And I looked at that and said, not actually. What's relevant about the Constitution in an incompetent court? There's nothing relevant in an incompetent court of incompetent jurisdiction. And the attorneys, again, are not setting the case up to make it relevant. And the attorneys, as we've read in the House delegation rules, delegation orders, the Bar Association is that NGO that agrees with the not in the gun at the foreign territory on U.S. soil, the UN. I've told you a long time ago that building should be flopped over on its side so that it makes a nice big raft. Put everybody that believes in the UN Agenda 21, Sustainable Development, all their emissaries, and shove that thing right into the Pacific Ocean. Give them a bunch of paddles and see how fast they can paddle back to Europe. Does anybody listen to me behind the woodshed on this principle? No. I don't know what to tell you, folks. So those with a knot in the barrel are trying to protect you, those that you say you have a right to an arm, and they make, oh, you can't ban these things. Oh, but you can ban the ammunition to a number. And I suppose that's been scientifically calculated that if each one of you had 10 bullets, you could overwhelm the government when it became a tyrant. I don't even need to go more, I'm sure, with all this crowd. You listen to me. You know this stuff. What are we going to do about it is the point. And they're making an inroad that says they can regulate that much. They can regulate just that much. Oh, we can't ban them, but we can take away all kinds of bullets. And I've told you the answer to all that again. And she based her decision, this so-called judge based her decision on a recent Ninth Circuit ruling. She's out of the really interesting thing is she's a district court judge of the Northern Mariana Islands. What have I told you about USDC courts? This is a court of competent jurisdiction in the Marianas Islands, a USDC court, folks. It's a territory of the United States. Where is the territory in the states that a USDC court would have competency? That the Portland case has any relevance in that court that they have up there. Again, JeffersonMiningDistrict.com's lawsuit. You'll find it on Justia, the docket. You'll see how we explained how I explained through the filings how you check this. and they couldn't, and we're still shaking our head. We were talking about it at the miners' meeting here Friday, the association meeting, not the district meeting, how the judge in our order, trying to dismiss our case, says he has no jurisdiction, right in the first sentence, or the first paragraph, I think. I have no jurisdiction, but. Well, that but is his seat in the chair, incompetently so, it must be in the street, because he couldn't identify the competent court he was residing in. I have no jurisdiction, but I'm going to try and interfere anyway. This so-called judge, this black-robed one, this costume they wear, is a felon, folks. He's committing treason right there. And so we've got the evidence of all this. This is not just my opinion. It's not me ranting. My rant, actually, if I sound like I'm ranting, is my frustration with y'all. And it kind of came to a head, if you will, the pimple that we is, right there in the not answering, not writing this letter to the CDC to even just stir it up a bit. As I move on, Big Pharma's patents on kratom alkaloids expose real reason DEA is banning this plant. Another thing that you could have sent an email on. I talked about that. Said there was actually a big issue going on. There was somebody, Brian Turberville maybe. I think if I remember right, I could get it wrong. It doesn't matter. No one seems to be rallying up to do much. The point is that there was another agency you could respond to, and the reason behind it is because the agency's revolving door with big corporation, which Corporation Nation's the documentary Corporation Nation by Clint Richardson explained that these are all incestuous relationships, and that Big Pharma's bottom line will be affected is the reason why the DEA is going to ban the plant, which is something you can use as counter, but they don't have that as a real reason. But does anybody write in a letter? No. But Blogcaster's going to have this link. A few of you go there, and I appreciate that, because it does take a lot of time to put the information in, and it is a lot more than I will ever get to on a broadcast. I don't even talk about the tip of the iceberg on this stuff. I don't even touch it. What I give you is my quick interpretation on how we're going to look at this and what we could do with it. I'll make it the nice word, otherwise I'll get trumped. It's blowing in the wind here if no one uses this information to do anything. So we have on the other issue of writing another style letter for all of y'all that see the DEA and trumping on what you now see are things that you can use in nature to help you. You need to step up because they're taking that away. How many, what was it, the Codex Alimentarius? How long have we been talking about just all this stuff under the water, under the bridge, sitting there festering all this time, and you think that that's not what's part of this? And I hear crickets on simple letters. It doesn't get anybody in trouble. Nobody. I haven't seen anybody get in trouble on this. I'm not asking you to do what we did, which is to call the Secretary of the Department of Interior. Well, actually, we didn't call her anything. We asked her to show cause how she wasn't committing felonies and treason. I'm not asking you to do that. Well, they took notice of that for sure. I'm not asking you to do that. I'm just asking you all to write letters. Start the process of your interaction in a pretty innocuous, pretty simple, easy, pretty safe. I mean, what safer than walking out in the street and finding a cop? And then when you start engaging, I don't know if you understand how this works out. You start engaging this and you become a thorn to these people. You finally find something, you become a thorn. Then you can use the fact, you put it in the public record, I think you're going to kill me. They start noticing that here. Now you put people on notice that you're actually becoming in danger. Now don't do that until it looks like they're going to do something or that the officer that you're dealing with is susceptible to that. As I took full value in the fact that the local sheriff actually went after somebody for trying to for not helping a company helping his wife one day, and they found out real quick that's not what you do. And so I used that fact in the news to say that we're afraid of this guy coming after us. And I have had other miners do the same thing. We're afraid of this guy coming after us for personal reasons. He's the person. So now we have some sort of they're going to come and take you out now? Obviously, it could happen, but the likelihood just went down. Why? Because we engaged. We showed we weren't chickens and limp wrist, no back, slithering snakes We stood up and we asserted ourselves responsibly, and now we find out how slimy they are. They're still a dangerous beast, but they're more likely to cower than not. And I have found in my goings-on where before we would get denied because we weren't quite right on the point. We would just be denied. Now they don't even want to talk to us. They can't even touch the can of whoop-ass we hand them. And then at that point you find out there's no remedy, and I want people to see that there's no actual remedy. And the why I want you to see that there's no actual remedy is that it then brings up we do have a remedy. It's invisible because it's in us, and we don't tend to look at ourselves and be honest about ourselves and the responsibility we have. We tend to want to excuse it, and I guess that's big. Coming back to the letter that no one wants to write. If we can't write the letter to defend ourselves in letter form, why are we going to do it when it comes down? And who cares that they gave us 10 rounds? They allowed us the 10 rounds. It said shall not infringe on a necessity to change government. Where is the authority to adjust that by some judge? I don't even care if it's a valid authority commissioned and established correctly. That you all don't understand that it's provable in statute that they are not competent in the states. See, that was in Mariana. I'll go back to that. Did you get that? That Marianas are a territory of the U.S. It's the same United States District Court that they have in the States. How is that consistent? Those of you that are well read and understand what I'm saying here, you need to identify for me where the territories are of the United States in the United States of the Union. Before you can begin to show me where the United States territory exists for USDC courts to have competency. Which I also know you're defeated before you start, but go ahead and give me a shot, because we might have missed something, and that judge and that clerk may have missed something. I've got a court default judgment, and a default on 2 quo warrantos, 2 judicial officers, 2 officers in judicial branch, which have the authority to sign orders, if you didn't know, understand about the power of the clerk, that could not answer how they were competent inside the United States of America, the Union. The legal entities, defendants of which could not answer into our case and didn't. That puts you in this, you get that admission ticket by writing letters, as simple as I'm telling you to that. So let's get over to that. John Rappaport finally comes in on this. He's been really thinking about this CDC thing, this problem, this indefinite detention of y'all even being healthy. I told you they were going to go after, use the police powers to take you out, and that's exactly what we're talking here. The police powers in health and safety and so-called morals, they'll throw this in. I don't know how all that affects anything, but they'll go after you, and John comes to the conclusion, if you need more information, I'm bringing it here, folks. There's nothing, there's one thing I can do. I mean, at least when I go to bed. I can go to bed and I can go to sleep. I've done what I can every day. And so I'm going to be able to go to sleep again tonight. I'm telling you, here's some more stuff you can use. I can only hope that you use it. I don't fret over that. I can't be your mind and your will and your choice. I can just hope I'm aiding a better decision in a better day. CDC police will eventually arrest the unvaccinated as diseased criminals. It is now the conclusion that John Rappaport comes to after his 30 years of being an investigative reporter over these health matters. He's finally being able to put in words. It tells you sometimes it takes a long time. I've told you that for myself. It takes a long time from when you read something to when you finally get the point, that he gets the point. And now he's writing about it. You're going to be arrested as an unvaccinated, diseased criminal, even if you're healthy. And I won't go through it. I don't have to read this stuff. If you're not important to you, if none of this is important to you, then I don't even know why you're listening. Maybe you like to hear me talk. Maybe you think what I'm saying is funny. Maybe you think it's not funny, but it's good and fun to listen to just to be more, maybe I'm turning into Alex Jones, but in the right content. You just like to be terrorizing yourself and be fearsome upon. I don't know. I guess I see I'm rubbed pretty raw about this letter thing. But John Rappaport comes on, and he's seeing that the way this thing works is that you will be arrested as a diseased criminal under the CDC rule, that if you don't answer it, that's your future, folks. He's got it. I don't have to argue with John. John gets it. He has his way of getting at it. That's fine. I mean, he gets it. When it comes to the point, I told you, when you finally see what's going on, nothing's transparent to you, you find yourself standing shoulder to shoulder with people, lifting their weight, taking the responsibility they felt they could pick up, not making excuses, not ignoring the ring in their nose as they all look in the sky and look for the sky falling, and don't realize it's the ground, it's the stinking abyss they're sliding into. They always see the sky is pretty, and you're looking up, sliding into the stinking abyss. Why? Because you're just letting yourself slide into the stinking abyss. He brings up this concept of pre-communicability, folks. All these have to be attacked in that simple letter. I mean, I could add lots and lots to that letter I tried to give you was simple. I got get you in the door. At least ask for an extension of time and get you in the door. Step up for yourself. Oh, he mentions the police powers here. I'm going to go through real quick. I don't even want to read this stuff. He's come to the same conclusion. I respect John's work, his investigation. I've never sat down deeply and worked it out because in some regard I don't have to. He's got it well right enough that and he's got proof for everybody if you want to. I've read some of them. They're right on. So at some point with all this going on, there's a storm in our face. We can only grab on to so much. I feel John picks up his part. I visualize him standing shoulder to shoulder, though we never talk. In fact, he won't even retweet a tweet. So, he's out here telling you about it. That may be his whole point. I wish he would just take these and distill them down since he's a writer and make himself a letter. I don't know if he has or not. But if he can't and he doesn't know to, maybe you can tell him, or you can pick up where he's brought the load to you, and it's now time for you to pick it up. He's now come onto the CDC problem, and he's given you the point. You're going to be considered like a pre-crime, pre-communicable criminal, unvaccinated. And I've told you about how you have to start defending yourself against those vaccinations, and you better go right to their data sheet where they agree that you can be killed. And then you can attack them they had no right to stick these known poisons in you, without giving you an option and a remedy to avoid it. Every imposition of law has to have a remedy against it, folks. You got to learn that yourself. When you don't have one, then you're in I call the military state. Now you got proof of it. You can't turn away from that. Now you know where the enemy is. And we were talking last week, and I can't for the life of me, I was thinking about it last night and then this morning, for the life of me, my reference to committing adultery, thou shalt not adulterate is what I want to tell you, because that's really universally applicable more than the sexiness of it. Thou shalt not commit adultery in adulteration. You're talking about one drop of E. coli in a whole bunch of gallons of water. Would you drink it? This little story came up. I want to show you how toxic the world is becoming, and we're allowing it, and the government is allowing it, those that are representing you. See, government fictions, the undead can't be poisoned, folks. If you haven't figured this little detail out. But this little report came through. I think Gary L. actually advanced it. I think it was through Twitter. So we see the value of Twitter, but we also see the very dangerous liability in it. But this is how little it takes to destroy industries, destroy your health, destroy your soil, destroy the choice. I was talking in a drop in big gallons of water. It comes down to atoms, folks, when you get down to groups of atoms that are sufficient. Although, I'm just going to read the story from this, talking about compost, of all things, for gardens and mom and pop farmers trying to get clean soil. Soil and rich soil is very difficult to keep and make and have enough of. It's been one of those secret, silent minerals, mineralizations that countries went to war over. You think they're going after oil, they're going after the phosphates as much, and other things. Nitrogen, again, nitrogen fixing and all these other, and then you got bioorganisms that do all this. And so soil is a very interesting science all by itself. To know it, but there was to show you the toxicity levels that it's getting down to, about what you have to be considerate of when you're dealing in the new chemistry, the chemistry that they promised to us would be what? The way life would go on and the future would be sustained. Although it's not widely known risk, herbicide contamination of compost has sprung up intermittently since 2000, said Greg Evanilo, a Virginia Tech crop and soil scientist and compost expert. I know experts say, but I'm just going to go off his facts, and we're going to see how this works. When this specific category of herbicide lingers, it can surprise compost producers and their customers. Quote, it's insidious because you think that you have no contaminant in your compost pile, or the amount of material that may have been contaminated with the herbicide represents only a small portion of the feedstock, the materials used to make compost, Evanly said, but it doesn't take much of the product. It can be 7 to 8 parts per billion, bravo, with a B, bravo, billion, 7 to 8 parts per billion that could then in the soil affect certain plants. That amount is the equivalent of 8 grains of salt in 1 billion grains of sugar. 8 grains of salt contaminating 1 billion grains of sugar is all this is. Remember I was talking about feeling like a grain of sand in the ocean? Well, apparently 8 of us can make a difference. We could go around the world just stomping out all these criminals. 8 of us in a billion will do it. Because that's how toxic the chemistry that we're using is for certain agricultural products that don't go away, that finds their way into so-called organic compost. That's enough to cause a problem in this story to this organic farmer. And the bottom line of this thing is that this concentration, as low as 1 part per billion, may negatively affect some plants, the story of which there were some plants from an organic grower were planted into this soil that didn't show for anything noticeable, and it killed their crop. Or it weakened it as well. To talk about the fact that we don't get involved with this administrative side writing simple letters, and we attack them on the science, we attack them on the law, we attack them on the facts, we attack them on their actual authority to do these kinds of decisions. This is the kind of thing that's going to go on. You won't be able to make food. This was a big deal for these organic growers, and so anyway, you can only hear the problem. 8 grains of salt in 1 billion grains of sugar, folks, is all that it takes. Talk about being a whole lot less than a 1 drop in a 50-gallon drum I'm offering. Do you want adulterate? It's not even your choice. Plants do not survive in that level of minor adulteration. And look how much more we take, more adulteration to our lawful forms of government, our lawful accountable forms that we have allowed pass with the Second Amendment is useless. You didn't even notice they didn't have a right to talk about it, and they're all said, you have the right to have a gun, but we're going to limit how many bullets you have in it. When the whole point was the man or woman making that decision should have the gun put on them while you're walking them to the jail. Because that's what that gun is now for, the usurpation of your lawful form of government. As the people see fit. You don't have to go to war, but you're certainly going to have that presence, which I'm trying to figure out and get you guys to figure out what we can do in paper for the lead to paper, not lead out of the barrel gun at this point. That this is again on this ongoing encroachment. You hear again this lie that goes on. There wasn't warm and fuzzy words. We got to have healthy water, pristine water. That's not potable, but that's okay. Nobody notices this. You have to have clean air, clean water, clean land, and everybody misses where the problem is. I won't write a simple letter to stop it. This is all part of that agenda that's coming down to corporate global governance control. Where do you think those toxins are coming from? What do you think? Again, the story about big pharma being protected under the bottom line when they're making a rule for that kratom stuff, and I read about it. I don't even know if that's valuable to most people. Maybe in its natural form, and it doesn't grow in many places that I understand. So, like the coca, some peoples know about how to use it. They don't take the abusive side of it, the addictive side of anyway, there's a word for that. Doesn't matter. We don't tend to be sitting within moderation or temperance as we were told we should. Everything in moderation, yes, certainly at least. Nothing that's adulterated to kill us or can poison us, but we don't seem to believe that in government. We people in government don't seem to believe that when it gets to that part. This is all triggering. If again, along the lines, if you look deeper, this is going and implementing the UN food security provisions, which is all global governance control. Big multinational corporations control this food security. Codex Alimentarius, I'm not going to go down all that. We did that how many years ago? Back in 2010, 9, 10, 11. But here's another thing coming down. We see all these, the WHO, or not the OWL, not the rock group, but the WHO, the World Health Organization, calling for these pandemics, identifying things we've never heard before. Then we find out about the genetic manipulation of critters, and then we wonder why all these new things are turning up. And then this one is really particular because it not just for, if we look at eugenics as a possibility, or the conforming of people, whether through shot or through these organisms, into a lesser physical form, lesser capable. Like if we all have autism, we're not going to be able to function except for those that don't have autism. They're going to be our rulers, and we'll be happy for that because we'll be most likely focused on pushing the same button all the time or drooling on ourselves. We need someone to help us. But when you see this story and you understand what's going on about what the overall goal is, this raises big alarms of what they're willing to do again to you. In my mind, I'd rather choose that they're doing it against me at this point and look at it as a man-made threat than I would as just all of a sudden we're discovering that if we get tick bite, lupus, forget lupus, that ain't nothing now. It'll trigger, a tick bite can now trigger severe meat allergies, which are on the rise around the world. Tick-induced mammalian meat allergy reported in Europe, Asia, Central America, and Africa, but most prevalent in parts of Australia and the U.S. Folks, did you ever hear of anything like this in history? That all of a sudden, consistent with the UN agenda, with everyone's going to go meatless, it's more efficient and less methane's produced when you don't have cows and beef, that we now hear that you can get bit by a tick and all of a sudden have a meat allergy. And so this is the WHO telegraphing all through continents. I'm surprised this is not a pandemic. All it took, remember, the word pandemic is a definition created by the WHO. It only takes two different regions in the world having the same pathogen, and they can declare a pandemic. So this is a seed drop here for y'all. It's gonna grow in your mind and fertilize. They'll fertilize it here now, and it'll pop out pretty soon. That this is strictly on the UN agenda to go to a meatless diet. You're going to be fed your hog corn, your human animal, human chattel, and it'll be GMO because you are going to be bit by a tick that now can give you a meat allergy. And so we've solved the problem of your deciding about wanting to eat meat. You'll now do it on your own, won't you? Or die. So those kinds that want to eat meat, we don't need anyway. And so I find this story pretty fascinating. I don't know if it didn't seem to go anywhere. I didn't see it kind of pop up and make a big scream. But it blew me away, first of all, that there was such a thing. And they found a disorder. It's a rare disorder that now is prevalent across the world. And folks, when they find these disorders and they have this DNA knowledge, they can start to do anything with that disorder and how that functions to put that into any organism, it seems. And all of a sudden we see it. Now again, that's really convenient, isn't it? It's consistent for sure. Coincidence? Well, normally I tell you, they're not normal, I'll say it again, coincidence happen. I don't know why people deny, that's not a coincidence. No, it is a coincidence. Two things happen at one time and there's a coincidence. My fit, well, I wouldn't do this, so I don't know if I want to lay that out. My voice impacting your ear is a coincidence. Whether it means anything to you is a whole different matter. That's a good one instead of my fist to your face. That's a better one. My words to your ear is a coincidence. Whether that means anything is up to you, I suppose. It's in the receiver. And we look at all these informations that are coming down, And I'm surprised that being on more of these continents, I'm surprised this wasn't a pandemic already, but I think it's coming, and it's consistent and coincident with the UN agenda to have a meatless people in the world and to feed them golden rice, which we now find is a fraud, and GMO corn, which eats out your gut bacteria and makes you all, vegan-like, faster. And I find these stories coming in really important to understand. And we'll go back one quick way, because here I'm building up to last week's discussion on these stakeholders, these stalking horses, these things that have standing and authority because they can affect you. You understand that the tick that can do this to you is a stakeholder in your life, as was and is Zika. Again, a study casts potential doubt on Zika as a culprit. The study and potential doubt, where we found out that there's scientists saying, no, it's actually the larval side that they're actually spraying that's causing this. That when you look at the numbers, Brazil has a far less incident rate of microencephaly than the United States itself already, that the whole thing starts to fall apart. But Zika is a stakeholder in your life. Why? Merely because it can invade and affect you. Now, the WHO, not the Owl or the Rock group, but the WHO, uses these as stalking horses. And so that's I hope, a cool way to get us back to last week, or I'm going to continue to read now. And I don't know if I can make it. There's a lot here. I was expecting to go through a lot quicker, as I usually do. But we didn't do that, so we're going to continue now. These things, by definition you heard last week, these things that can affect a firm. And I said that you're not listening if you're not hearing that the firm is the person is you. The person is you. It's actually that thing, that fiction that you keep attaching to yourself and agreeing to when you don't say it's not there, or that when it was wrongly or feloniously applied to you. This is their thought process coming from this non-constitutional, non-law, non-people condition. That a stakeholder is essentially something that can affect you. In other words, whatever, right or wrong, or good or bad, whatever it affects you is something that you're going to have to bring into your kitchen table and sit down at the table and put a consideration to and make a decision consistent with its demands. And as I identified this all for you last week, it was, Genghis Khan and his horde come to your door. He becomes a stakeholder in your life, doesn't he? By this definition. Doesn't mean he's a good guy. In fact, he's probably a big marauding criminal who he brings anarchy into your life. For those of you that really continue to hold on to that, and there's another thing coming up here that I could not believe when I read it. But anyway, let's stay here. He got his horde behind him. He's knocking on your door. He's a stakeholder now. And I told you before, I'm not sure if I coined the term, but it happened so long ago I don't remember. I called them gang green, these people, this green religion. It comes to affect your life by their impositions. They become a stakeholder by their mere existence to impose. Is the gang and the horde standing behind Genghis that I termed I've expanded now the gang green to Genghis green, and not Genghis as in the man, but Genghis as in just the gang, the organized criminals, standing behind a figure that looks like authority, making a demand, knocking on your door, is a stakeholder in your life. Now, it's an interesting view to say that you can do that, but the way they're using it is it's a valid imposition in your life. And I've told you last week, I say this all the time, I said it last week, this is a felony against you that is being rationalized in this reflexive imputation of authority into the matters of your life that I'm touching on now in this book of Stockholders and Sustainability, utilizing also the discussion of the counter to stakeholders and accountability, and using stockholders as being a stakeholder but subject to that imposition in your life. Again, the stakeholder is because a criminal can interfere with you, it becomes a stakeholder in your life, is what a stakeholder is in the context of sustainable development, Agenda 21, the model codes in businesses, what government is turning into, the tyranny you see. And so starting back a little ways, I'm going to restart speaking here from the document. I found it at UNmeater College. I call it a guru level paper. It explains to the disciples the history of how they got from stakeholder to where they are and how to implement it against you, and gives them the notice that they have an authority just because they can cause you trouble. Now, those are my words, but distilled down to the simplest form, all these words you're going to hear run that down to that point. But you have to hear how they build the rationale, because to understand the insanity of how this comes together allows you to dissect it, pull it apart, and find its weak spots. In this book, Milton Friedman, who looks at this thing, he's the first one to do so. I said, remember, anything historic, everything first time, you've got to look very carefully. In this case, this is a very big issue to be exposing to you all. It was just confirmation to me. I found these page 13 to 39, I think it was, the nugget, if you will, in this document. There's more to be read. I put it in the blogcaster for those of you that want to follow along from last week, or in last week's blogcaster. In this book, Freeman did what no one else had done yet successfully attempted. He confronted the vague term stakeholder notion head-on and developed a pragmatic, comprehensive analysis of business and its stakeholders according to business functions, products, markets, activities, and duties. Now again, I interject. Global governance is corporate global governance. So you see, the UN is pushing this very thing. They talk about it in the terms of business and firm. Well, that also translates over to commerce, so commerce, authority, and Congress, and that's how they push through sustainable development on the executive side, which is what we fight at Jefferson Mining District through the simple means of writing letters and outing these people and really causing a lot of trouble for them at that point. And we're just, again, hoping beyond hope. There's more of you that'll just follow up. And as I've said, the reality is the mining community, those are the grantees, are a microcosm of the macrocosm we call America. The failures of the miners are the failures of America. And this is today what's going on inside the miners. There's 99.9% of the miners are either in, most of those are clueless. There's a small percentage that are running all those miners off on a rail and a track and over the edge by promoting wrong things. Things that you go look in the law, the statutes, and you can find are wrong things. But everybody's got their head stuck in the sand in the mining community, and instead of listening to me tell them to go read where I'm finding this stuff and understand and become intelligent about what you're doing, they'd rather listen to those that would write the letter for them, and it happens to be another representative voice that will not do anything but cause them harm. The microcosm of the mining community is the macrocosm we call America. I've got it, proof of this on my broadcast right now, and none of you will write a letter. You'll let me do it, but you won't step up. And in this case, in property disposal, and where our rights are to our own and what we only have the right to assert, it's up to us to assert them. It's up to us to deny a representation that can't help us or identify how it's a crime, and that's so simple to do in these matters. But so this stakeholder notion, he got met head on and looked at the comprehensive nature attached to what businesses do that they're funneling this thing into, and it goes on this report here, this study, whereas past scholars and practitioners, and I told you practitioners were the bar, had referred to stakeholders in passing or had merely assumed a shared understanding of the term, Freeman consciously introduced and articulated the basis for a theory that competes head-on with the commonly accepted stockholder theory of the firm. Let me offer to you this. In 1953, in 26 or so states directly, you can find this directly, the Bar Association came in and hit head-on the de jure government of the people and substituted it for another new notion, comprehensively discussed and dealt with underneath the Model Business Corporation Act. It is no different than what they just said right here. This guy is just picking up what had been done before. This is being done here by this guy in 1984, which starts at the time when they're going to impose what you now see today as sustainable development, is the consensus reality, unreality. It's the solutions network. It's all the things that we I've talked about in our talk. We can find right there in the proofs. They're not hiding this. The choice of the word stakeholder was intentional. So this is someone who took a lot of thought and approach, strategically hit this thing to expand its use so that they could use it improperly. His discussion goes on to say what this is. He asserted words. I mean, how many times have I told you these terms are all things, folks, to us? That's how we communicate. They can't be diminished. They can't be diminished in their importance. But he says, words make a difference in how we see the world. By using stakeholder, managers and theorists alike will come to see these groups are having a stake. Stakeholder connotes legitimacy. And while managers may not think that certain groups are legitimate in the sense that their demands on the firm are inappropriate, they had better give legitimacy to these groups in terms of their ability to affect the direction of the firm. That, as I told you last week, is the definition of theft by extortion and felony coercion. And that is the style of legitimacy that someone has. That is the same style as anarchy. It will just affect you, counter to whatever you believe. Why? Because it's a force that can affect you. Period. That's it. They don't need to know anything more. It's legitimate because it can. Not just cause, just 'cause. Although Freeman goes on to say this study, although Freeman does not prioritize stakeholder concerns, he does indicate that they can be mapped and illustrated in a constellation vis-a-vis their position to the firm and each other, as shown in Figure 2, which I don't have for you on the air, but you just look at these charts that we now have, we can get on the internet to show you all the connections to all the people, is what they're talking here, that can be mapped, and they are. And these people are good at doing all this for you. Through this sort of stakeholder map, a firm can identify the general groups of stakeholders along with the specific stakeholders that populate those groups. McDonald's, for example, has general stakeholders including the government, competitors, employees, and customers. Within the general group of competitors are fast food chains such as Burger King, Wendy's, and Hardee's. Stakeholder maps help reveal the level and type of interaction with and between stakeholders. Stakeholders, the people that can affect you. In this case, the ones that are legitimized because they can commit theft by extortion and felony coercion against you. This is the organized crime syndicate map here by this definition, as we're reading, or this study's findings, and by that word definition, that your legitimacy is strictly because you can affect somebody. Now, Genghis Khan and his horde can affect you. By this rule, he is a stakeholder. Well, no, he's dead, but the concept idea. Genghis Green is no different. A horde and can affect you is legitimized just because they're a horde that can feloniously, in our case treasonously, affect us. This is so important for you to hear. I'm going really I hope I'm slowing down. You really have to understand this point. This is like the crux. When I read this, I just could not, my mind was going, there it is. This is the admission, not by my findings, not by my research. This is the source of this thing, said in their words, explaining exactly what I've told you is going on. I told you their consensus process is a felony against us. The process that they use for advisory councils is a felony against us. The way they use the solution alternatives, it's a felony. Now, this tells you that they can't do anything but felonies. And I'll advance something before I get to, I think the point is better made. I'll do it right here. By definition, the term itself, I made a mistake, and maybe I'll get into this a little later. I made a little mistake. I shifted the time when they become criminals. I put it on what they done. They said these solution network alternatives, all these things were what they done, these people. That was the crime. No, I now see clearly the fact that they exist as a stakeholder is the crime. The word, the term, stakeholder, is a crime. When you get down to property rights and all those things. Again, pointing out, now I can go to that judge doing the Second Amendment. It was a felony crime for that court to think it had jurisdiction over something that shall not be infringed and determinable by the people for a purpose that was to put her in check. She was a stakeholder because she can affect your rights, and she does. No different than Genghis Khan knocking on your door, asking you for a cup of water. Or maybe to stay the night. Don't let Dracula in the door. So, stakeholder you have to get here is, on its own, the term means crime in the context that it's used against us. Certainly, innocuous people that can influence your firm, your infirm firm. Notice the inversion there. You're not firm if someone can come and beat you up. That's chaos. That's no control, no expectation of anything. But the firm is controlled by what can affect them, shows there's no law involved. It means that in the context of soil disposal or rights or granted antecedent before the government, these people can come along and interfere with them. They are criminal. The word stakeholder in this capacity, in and of itself, without any further action, is a crime. I can't express deeply enough and convey to you powerfully enough. You have to understand that. In other words, it shifted my point of departure when the crime happens from not the act, which is what we normally consider a conduct, but from the status itself. If Genghis Khan is coming towards your town, there's a crime about to happen. I can only tell you. And so are these people that do these. Freeman thus formally introduced stakeholders in a business context and explained their significance to business strategy. He's explaining. Again, he's now fabricating the world for everybody to accept. Shall they do so? And this is where it breaks down. If you understand this thing about choice, if he's not doing it lawfully, you don't have to accept any of it. And if he doesn't have a title to what he's talking about, you don't have to accept it. It's only for those that are going to be in league with him to be criminals that will accept this. By any excuse, I guess. He's focused on business because it goes to then the regulable entity, doesn't it? This is why they're doing that. But he made sense of the term scattered history and presented a clear and operable framework for management to follow. He turned the vague concept of stakeholder notion to a more concrete approach and began conversation. Well, those two words are close in my mind. Conversation about more expansive understanding of the nature of the firm. So he's constructing a false reality that people can agree with, that he's focusing on management, which are those people that walk in the door of their business and eliminate their personal ideas in favor of what? A reflexive response to the firm, which is acceptance that stakeholders have to have, those that are criminals, have to be given a seat at your table. And you're just apparently helpless to have another thought about that. A discussion on the study goes on to relationship view of the firm. During the past 30 years, stakeholder theory has evolved from a mere identification of stakeholder into a more developed inquiry into the nature of stakeholder relationships and their influence on each other and firms. This is just more organized criminal syndicate reorganization to become more effective, the adaptation portion of what they're doing. In other words, you see the data comes out, they look at it, they evaluate it, and then they adapt based on what that evaluation says in order to be able to work more closely together as a gang to affect other firms. Increased emphasis has been placed on a relationship themselves and how those relationships are intermingled. It's collusion and integration, folks. If you haven't heard those two words opposite together, they want to integrate everybody. This is what they're talking about. Increased emphasis has been placed on relationships. So this is your relationship. This is why another reason why we hit it head on and say, well, my relationship to the grantor is not interferable by you, not infringible by you, you felon. See, we got to go where they went, and we have a more powerful position. but it's about your relationship. They speak to this term relationship only in the context of how they can gang up on you to interfere with you in a criminal way. And as soon as you keep this in your mind, and not just dispose it now to say, oh, these people are just criminals. When you hear the word stakeholder, that's a criminal. No, there's a method, there's a function behind how this works. And you have to grab that. And I'm saying this in the context, we do it in the context of agency, in the context of it interfering with property disposal and other things. But this is the method tactic that's used globally right now. And about I can identify it just about everywhere. It's partly how, as I'm reading all these things, I'm hoping you're picking up how you can identify what I was doing in Agenda 2030, talking about how the Pope was doing what they were doing, what they're trying to discuss and expose, who they're getting involved with, why they're getting involved with those people. Most likely you'll notice it's because it most adversely affects that's the team, the gang, the execution crew, the destruction crew that goes in and can most adversely affect the target. And reading on, we're not going to finish it, I don't think, again, so much. Increased emphasis has been placed on this relationship themselves, so you got to look at that. There's another analysis to do, and I don't have time to do that here, about these relationships. But they do make maps of their organization, so they actually will tell you how they're organized, and we've used all that. It's just they're here to be had for those of you that really want finally to stop whining about something, stop worrying about why they're attacking us, and go be an offensive against them, be offensive to them. But you do it with the facts and the law, and you don't get off the path. In this rendering, the firm is removed from the center and treated on par with other stakeholders, as all of which exist in relationship with one another. All the criminals are at your table. Guido is sitting right next to you, having a discussion over your stuff. And what you're going to do about it, or not do about it. The firm, in turn, is affected by these relationships, even those in which it is not directly involved. Well, now we got the unknown. Now you hear what Rumsfeld is talking about, the known, the unknown, whatever else that statement was. It sounded ludicrous. These guys are running the plan. These people know exactly what they're talking about. They put it in other terms. You got to be afraid of the boogeyman has a stake, folks. Did you just hear that? I mean, it just came to me. Let's put it down in some understandable terms. The boogeyman has a stake in your life. Your fears become that enabler. I hope you hear the protocols of the elder design are working on your frailties here. It just, to me, this was like I said, it was a pretty interesting article to read and just see it developed right here. They really did a good job of developing this thing to explain to us some of even the nuances. And if you know what you're looking at more and can do some more study, or even mentally with the research that you have, this is a very rich amount of information. And so much so, I'm taking time on the broadcast to read to you, and that reminds me as I say that, and if Vince is listening, and easily, hopefully so, laid back, I did I think a 6-part broadcast where I read the Libra Code and made my comments, kind of like what I'm doing here. 6 parts. I don't even know where it is. Some of those you might want to look it up. The problem is having the Libra Code on every broadcaster page is not going to be isolated, so I'm not sure how to find that. I couldn't find it quickly, and I ran out of time. But I've read and discussed the Libra Code at length, all 157 or so articles. So I think I heard that as a request that Vince had made. For anybody who can help him find that, I'd appreciate it for him. But reading on here, take as an illustration. This is this documentation trying to convince everybody of the rationale behind, or to actually present a rationale, so-called, to people to pick up and buy into and start promoting. And here we go right to the point of where this threat is all about. Take as an illustration the firm and 2 stakeholders, workers or employees. Again, master-slave relationship is employment. For those of you that don't understand that definition, the term master and slave relationship is the employment relationship. So this is an interesting statement here, hidden. Workers, slaves, and the environment is the illustration here. As figure 4, which I don't have again, you can get it's all, again, last week's blogcast, you can be looking, following as I'm reading through this. As figure 4 shows, the firm has a relationship with workers, e.g. salary and workplace conditions. the firm has also a relationship with the environment, such as through its use of natural resources, its promulgation of consumerism, the donations it makes through environment-related charities, and so on. And so this guy advances this thesis that this is an obligation and duty of firms, and you can choose it if you so choose. And as a management coming through the education system, the university system that we sued, which promotes this to all their students and their consumers of their product, we'll come out of those schools with the consistent objective of being reflexive. It's pretty simple how this works once you see it. Workers, too, the slaves, that employee-slave relationship of employment, workers, too, have relationships with the environment, and these relationships often differ from those between the environment and the firm. Now folks, I understand we all have an environment. We exist without these people in an environment, but these are talking now in terms of externalities and legalisms. So don't lose sight that we're not talking about natural environment here. He didn't even mention it here yet. Natural resources are not the natural environment. That is a different definition, besides the fact the thing that they tell you that they're controlling and have no right to. But anyway, that's a whole other discussion. At times, workers and firms are divided on approaches to the natural environment. Which one? The one that they're talking about internal to the fictions and the corporate structure, or the real birds and bunnies that they claim that they're protecting when they use those as stalking horse stakeholders to interfere with your life? You can think, you have to put these categories of thought when you read this document. So you got to put your thinking cap on. This is why I told you a long time ago, when you read a lot of these things and read laws and statutes, you have to put them in categories and thoughts of probabilities, possibilities, the way it might work, the way it does work, the way it's working now, opposed to the way it should work. All these thoughts have to be sitting in your mind, and I know half of my listeners say, that's too much work, I'm not going to go do it. I'd rather just chat in the chats, go drink a bottle of beer, go have a barbecue and all that. Yeah, I guess that's all there, but because we keep going there, they keep doing this. Pretty soon you're not going to be able to have that beer and that barbecue. You can only have 10 rounds now in your shall not be infringed arm to defend yourself against the oppressor. You don't think they're coming after your beer? And I just, it's open to debate, isn't it? We'll see. They can't take the beer. They'd really then tick you off, wouldn't they? Wasn't good enough when they took 10 ammo boxes of ammunition to protect yourself, but you talk about the 6-pack, watch out. Now, talking about the approaches to the natural environment between workers and the firms themselves. For example, if workers have an interest in some sort of environmental concern, the firm behaves irresponsibly toward the environment. Workers can react either by protesting, lobbying legislators, or quitting. In the converse, particularly responsible behavior by the firm can result in increased worker loyalty from environmentally conscious workers and or disloyalty from workers who do not have an interest in the environment. The relationships between the worker, firms, and environment are both distinct and interrelational, with each stakeholder having a separate relation with each other and with the others within the cluster. Now, the cluster term comes up with strategic planning in the sense of business clusters as well, under zoning rules that are, when you look at the truth of the fact, are not really implementable against people who understand about patent property. And that's not a question. You all have a patent if you have a piece of land anywhere. You look at, any of you that have a property or not, you look at any piece of property and it's got a patent underneath it. You just got to go look for it. It's in your land bureau of your state, or your state land bureau. In fact, I'll hopefully get, maybe tomorrow, next week, I'll get to a discussion attaching Bitcoin to these papers. It's a monumental crime right in our face going to happen. The blockchain being used for these papers. It's a monumental crime. I didn't see any discussion about it when that came through. I made a discussion. I ended up writing a letter to it. But you're going to see how this thing is going to impose itself there, and it's already in play. As I told you, watch out for this blockchain being an actually governmental tool. But at any rate, so this clusters now we talk about is also consistent with the use of land for business purposes and where you will do that business. You also understand they're talking about management that's conducive to the environmental impositions that they will have to be considered of, and these Genghis green interlopers that will be sitting at their desk. Right there is what I'm telling you comes out of the universities. Consider, as an example, Coramza, a clothing manufacturing company in Guatemala. Levi Strauss & Company, a customer and potential competitor to Coramza, has negotiated with the government of Guatemala in support of more stringent local labor laws compliant with international labor organization standards. Workers in Guatemala generally, quote, parenthetically, stakeholders of all companies doing business there. They lumped all the slaves together now. All together now. All together now. All together now. Companies doing business benefit from the International Labor Organization Standards Initiatives. Coramza, and a company that wishes to operate as a responsible employer, also benefits from the LSC&C's actions because now all industry-related companies are required by law to pay the costs associated with responsible employment. LS&Co. has effectively elevated the acceptable standards of behavior for an entire industry through its initiatives. It is essential to recognize that stakeholders have relationships with each other and that those relationships can have an influence on the practices outside the firm, and LS&CO's actions have here. In this situation, the effect was beneficial. The reverse could be true. Had the reverse been true, for example, if LS&CO was lobbying for a negative change, Coramza would want to be aware of this, possibly to counter LS&CO's, Levi Strauss & Company's, efforts. Well, they have that right anyway. So that's not even a negative negative change example that would be applicable. They now point to this situation was beneficial. In the beneficial, it's the implementation of the global international order. They don't speak of it where it wasn't. They also don't speak of it where it was not actually beneficial to the business. They only speak it in the concept of the businesses against each other, which are always considered as stakeholders here, able to do that. And any business in competition, free open competition, is going to be that, isn't it? It's going to be affecting you. You're going to have to, if I make a widget and you make a widget, if I expect to sell widgets, I'm going to have to at least have a sales and price and quality that's comparable to yours. Well, unless you're a dullard. I mean, if we're all both being equal, we're going to have to produce very similar types of products by standards we've set. That competition is what drives this whole thing. Not some international code that brings the benefits of the implementation of a obligation and duty that's imposed upon you, that if you don't do this, you're just not a good company, and we are going to tell everybody that you're just not a good company. Because you, we claim, does not regard the environment. And this is the big problem. Who's going to want to help someone that doesn't regard the environment? Look what the Indians are doing up in Dakota about this. A lot of it's not issues at all, and not findable, and not there. But there, look what they do. And I look in the situation, I find the attorneys, the Genghis Green, Khan, Bar Association, Global, sitting right there to present them. What hypocrisy! And what gets wasted is the actual things that the Indians have something to protect. What they can't see, they're not so visionary to see, is that they're a stalking horse being used by these people, and they will, like any regime, they'll all be kicked to the wayside if they're lucky, if not shot politically, when they're done being used when they're done being used as that tool, as we all, as anybody that's seen that can look into history and find that be the fact. This example of Levi Strauss Company and Coramza reflects a move away from an exclusive fixation on stakeholder-specific characteristics to a more complex and accurate examination of the web of relationships in which firms are embedded and ramifications of their sections. And I don't think I'm too far afield to say that web of relations response would be the Internet, as well as they consider nothing on the Internet not commerce. Focusing on the relationships involved and identifying areas of cooperation in this way has proved successful in many areas, such as with issues involving globalization, where non-governmental organizations have spearheaded numerous successful partnerships with corporations. Well, NGOs are corporations. But NGOs are actually given the certification by the UN. Which what does what? Advanced globalization. Which is what to us? It's a felony. Because the acting members are legitimized by their ability to commit crime on us. The American legal system is consistent with the sort of relational stakeholder thinking. Considerable legislation exists that names specific stakeholders and prioritizes their interests above those of stockholders. In fact, analysis of law reveals that the network of interconnected stakeholder relationships that underlie corporations, firms are required to attend to the concerns of stakeholders because of the importance of these relationships to the ongoing existence of the firm. In other words, restated, because they can adversely affect the firm by their lawlessness imparted upon the firm. Number 3, the environment itself now giving personage in the form of its ability to be Genghis Khan because I say so, and that's tough on you. And you either give me a seat at your kitchen, and I want some bagels and coffee, or else I'm going to make your life miserable. You'd be lucky to be living in your house after I get done with you. Me and my horde, my homies. The environment, number 3. Page 27 of this document. During the last 20 years, diverging arguments have emerged in support of businesses having responsibilities for the natural environment. Look how short-term this is. The last 20 years, and this thing, I think this article was written in 2012 or so, 13. The last 20 years, diverging arguments have emerged in support of businesses having responsibilities for natural environment. In other words, it's not a universality that the natural environment is an imposition. It's just the reality that's been promoted that they're trying to get everyone to buy into. It's not law. It's just what you agree to do. That's your will and your choice. Now they've got you. You've made the decision, and in large part, you don't even know you're making that decision. And for those of us that know that it's a felony, they're just going to impose the position because the seats of decision are this thing that makes those decisions. And why I tell you there's a certain way to approach that, and we have, and apparently that's a successful way. For everyone else that doesn't understand that, in fact, we had a little discussion in the RLM chat right before that. I exposed like this how these incompetent courts, and I exposed it in the beginning of this broadcast. The Marianas is a territory of the United States. The USDC court has competency in that territory, but doesn't have competency to decide your rights. And so in that case, as I think about that, you can see, well, within the territories of the United States, they're only given 10 bullets. But do you live in the territory of the United States? And if not, is that decision competent to control you? And if you say no, then you realize that these are just the things that they'll let you buy into, that if you have that knowledge, you can say, wait, that had no bearing on me. That decision is incompetent to instruct or to define or to work in a jurisdiction that is not a territory of the United States. And so I ask you again, where in the United States of the Union of the United States is a territory of the United States? Might we conclude maybe only Washington, D.C., which means these USDC courts throughout the country in these so-called districts are not competent to hear Article 3 matters. The environment. During the last 20 years, again, we're so quickly onto this, it's just a brand new thing. Among the chief concerns that have arisen has been the legitimacy and standing of the natural environment as a stakeholder, and the ways of the environment relates to business and its various constituents. Now, those of you on the East Coast know what the environment, the natural environment, will take you out. Matthew, for the time of its existence, was a stakeholder. There is no doubt. But I think we're talking about a different type there, aren't we? They're not talking about the environment of Matthew and the weather. They're talking about a business environment where legal entities can come around and legitimize themselves, have standing purely because they can enforce a crime upon you. Now, before I lose some more people, what are we going to do about this? What have I been saying? You call out the felony. You ask for the title to do that. Now, businesses are in a kind of a weakened place because they get their existence, when you register them, they get their existence through the laws of the state, which is a fallen creature as well, right? So you have to think about this, how this works through before you ask, well, what do we do about this? Or there's nothing we can do. There's a whole lot we can do. You just have to understand the basics, the foundation of how the criminal, what makes him the criminal that comes against you, and then call him out. The legitimacy and standing of the natural environment is its ability to impose upon you by this rule. Matthew was a stakeholder in the East Coast, wasn't he? Her, she, whatever, the name, whatever. The weather. Was Matthew actually a stakeholder? Well, no. But naturally, it's going to affect us. But legal, mutual fund insurance won't cover acts of God, as we call them, will it? So that we just noticed the jurisdiction apart, didn't we? So they're not talking about the natural environment, as we might consider men and women understanding our environment, understanding what Mother Nature can do to us. The environment that we're talking here is in the context of firm corporation business and its ability to be constrained not only by law, which these people will want to avoid like the plague or evade, as I see it here, evading, and try to impose that on your management. And I say that these firms, the person is you, the person is you, and they're influencing you by this the same way. While the status of the environment as a stakeholder has not been fully resolved, the relationship view of the firm is helpful in addressing some of the more pressing concerns relating to human influence on the biosphere. Human being the monster, as we find Ballantyne's dictionary in 39 defining us, if we want to choose that title. All I know is we're men, women, together, or not, individual, working, non-dependent, if we can go there. The environment as a stakeholder, they've given the environment personhood here, and its relationship to the firm. Now you see that it can't have a relationship in the natural sense. It's natural only with respect to legal entityism. Now, we push this out to have what's so-called human, the little monster's influence on your firm, as they come from the biosphere. It's an interesting concept, being you're dealing with the undead, and they're dealing with us as monsters, in a generic universality of biology. Now, this is where the biodiversity treaty starts to kick in, but that had already kicked in actually at this time. The status of environment as a stakeholder only becomes relevant in the last 20 years, and as a question that's still unresolved. They're resolving it in their methodology, which is to take data, evaluate the data, and adapt to get this to be going in, to get you to buy in or force you to buy in like the CDC is doing when you don't write the letter. It'll allow you to be criminalized and forced and vaccinated because you are an animal that is a danger, even though you're healthy. A separation thesis, and this is what's very interesting and that shows us the dynamic. This is the method they use to cause an irrationality, a failed thesis to become what they use to come up with the notion of their object and come up with the outcome after saying that the thesis they fabricated was in fact no good to use in the beginning. But now that we're here with this new idea, we're going to move on from there. You need to hear for this. Very interesting. And again, as I'm hearing it in my headphones. I have no way to stop this. If you're hearing I won't mention it. There's some noise that's irritating me right now, and I can't figure out how to stop it, and I can't get rid of it. So if you're irritated, I apologize. I've been working on it for months and months. Can't figure it out. So anyway, I'll go back to it. A separation thesis and the environment. Very interesting statement right there. And what they do to you in your mind about all this to bring in that environment as a stakeholder, which it's not. But it's also a stakeholder only in the concepting of legal isms. Now, I'm going to bring up a thing. I said, remember that your businesses are recorded in the state. Well, what if you had one that you had the right of a livelihood that you could just make your own? I don't know if you look very carefully, and they made it very hard anymore. If you're a private contractor that has no slaves, you really don't have to follow the state statutes under labor. You're a private contractor making a livelihood, not an employer in the slave-master relationship that they have to protect the slaves. In other words, voluntary slavery under regulation is lawful. It's that involuntary stuff that they claimed unlawful that you, because of your silence, agree and volunteer in. All you voluntarists, you're living that life. You're living your voluntary life right now. The same one you complain about is all around us, is the voluntariness that they presume upon you because you don't say no. This is not all that hard, actually, to see. And again, it just dumbfounds me to hear no one really responding correctly and thinking that's good enough, and it's just not. Addressing environmental concerns from a stakeholder perspective. Did you understand the problem there? Stakeholders are in the environmental perspective. That you will not be a stakeholder without environmental perspective. And it's a criminal perspective, using the environment of either the legalism or the natural, or the title of natural, as your club. Because the club itself has become the stakeholder, hasn't it? Why? Because it can influence your outcome, isn't it? It's an influencer, isn't it? Even Guido knows that. Addressing environmental concerns from stakeholder perspective demands addressing the so-called separation thesis. Oh, okay, so now we've got to be dislocated from our own thoughts, as they said you had to do as management walking in the door of a firm, drop your own personal morals. We're going to give you the separation anxiety now. Or the notion, as they define it here, that business and ethics represents distinct functional areas. Now they've just split you again. So stakeholders are this Sybil, if you can see, committing crime against you. But this is how they start this whole thing off. It's a separation thesis. You just have to be a stakeholder. You have to see the perspective through this. So you have to understand it. The term derivatives derives from an article of R. Edward Freeman, published a decade after Strategic Management, in which he asserts that one of the key problems in business thinking is the view that business and ethics are isolated from one another. This impoverishes both our understanding of business and our understanding of ethics. Now, how are you going to understand ethics when your position is that of a criminal? It's honor among thieves, maybe. This is the gang that you map out. But you have to continue to understand they're talking from the stakeholder perspective. You're a criminal. And if you think like normal, and you have ethics and morals of your own, that becomes a problem for this strategic management. I said strategic plans. Remember, that's all part of this. Strategic plans. Strategic management. These are the outsiders, the Genghis Green, the felons, managing your business because they have a stake at the table. And impoverishes our understanding of business and our understanding of ethics, because it removes their imposition. So if we use this separation thesis and we become civil, we're going to be able to promote something that we aren't going to have to be accountable to. But it's a stalking horse anyway, as we'll find. In most instances, this type of approach will enhance, all these words are right here, folks, the efficiency of the organization. Which one? The one that's the criminal, or the one that they're going to affect as the criminal? Does it make it easier for them to encroach, or not? See, they keep it neutral here, but they're talking about, this is a guru paper on how you take out people. How you take, the people. Those corporations are people too. And you bring them into the fold, because you can threaten them. One example of this compartmentalization and functional areas of business and its inefficiency, however, is risk missing the big picture. In its efficiency, however, it risks missing the big picture, this compartmentalism in the functional areas, which they've now destroyed. They've separated it all out on a thesis that is part of another idea, another hypothesis, that is still having some problems within the last 20 years, is having still discussions. So nothing's set in stone. They're just waiting for everyone to buy in, and they're having trouble. And then we popped up. I'm talking about we, those of us that understand this. More troubling, it can leave out altogether certain functional areas that do not contribute obviously to the bottom line, and one which is ethics. In terms of business and ethics, the separation thesis implies that business and ethics are distinct and non-overlapping. Business is concerned with the financial bottom line without consideration of ethics, while ethics is concerned with the individual adherence to moral norms devoid of the contingencies of business. And then I ask you, then what's the ethics rules for the Bar Association, folks? They're just a business. It's a trade profession. Again, this whole thing is a setup. It's a non-rational consideration. It's bringing, making a non-reality, discussing the creation of a non-reality and trying to promote it as something that ought to be considered when in fact there's nothing to consider here. It's a false a thesis to bring us the outcome eventually. We create a false narrative which we rely on to rationalize against, and it's a stalking horse, it's a ghost, it's a false front, it's a straw man. Okay, all you folks that understand this stuff, you see it working right here. You focus on the one that you're all worried about, and they're working with them all the time against you. You don't see that one. The separation thesis as it relates to business and ethics is mistaken chiefly because the first firm's bottom line is influenced by a multitude of interrelated decisions and effects, most of which are associated with the significant ethical concerns. What are the ethical concerns to a criminal? But here they said it. The separation thesis as it relates to business and ethics is mistaken. So now he creates this straw man and then he burns him. But he's moving on now in the theory of why we have to know. He's now incorporated now why the environment it becomes the stakeholder. He's got us to figure out, we got to include the stakeholder. It was riding in on the back. It was of the Trojan horse of the straw man. That it's a thesis he created. Now he destroys it for the sake of his argument. And in rides the environmental imposition attached now by these this split dissonance in the management. Now we have an ethical and a moral problem here. It was one that he fabricated and then creates. It didn't exist before. The same holds true for issues involving the natural environment where, again, the effects of decisions are multiple, interrelated, and embedded with ethical concerns. But he just said the separation thesis as it relates to ethics and business is mistaken. So apparently it's mistaken when applied to the natural environment as real nature. A variation, goes on to say, this study goes on to say, is a variation of the separation thesis. Also, now we're going to, just folks, I just don't know. My thoughts in silence to myself answer all these things, and I just can't know if I can explain these correctly. A variation on the separation thesis. He just said it's mistaken when it's applied to the very thing, subject matter he's talking about. Now he's going to talk about a variation on the thesis to impose again one more shot that says, this is legitimate, even though it's mistaken. These paragraphs are really self-explanatory at some level. Maybe I shouldn't interfere, but it just seems to me these subtleties are missed by a lot of people that explain this condition. It's an insanity that we're dealing with in these people. And this is, when you see how they put this together and how they get there, you can dismantle it really quickly. In variation of the separation thesis also impedes a proper understanding of the application of law. In reference to business, the most common reference are to corporate law, or as if it were a separate and discrete body of law. Although often regarded as relating to internal governance, it in fact involves both internal and external relationships. Now he's making the linkage, the externalities that they're going to come in with as a criminal against you. The reality is that the laws of the United States are overlapping and interconnected, just as are the relationships that comprise business. Thus, while corporate law refers to those laws specific to the creation of and organizations of corporations and their agents, it coexists alongside other federal and state legislation. Viewed from this angle, it is clear that the law, in quotes, the law is not partial to stockholder primacy. In fact, There are innumerable examples of instances where the interests of specific stakeholders are prioritized over the interests of stockholders. An example of this occurred in the case of Schleinsky versus Wrigley, where the court upheld the right of managers to choose not to install bright lights in a baseball stadium, which would have been bothersome to and offensive to neighbors, even though they would seemingly have had a positive impact on profitability by increasing the number of games that could be played. The separation thesis, quote, separation thesis, fails as a successful operative principle regarding business and its legal environment. But he invented that imposition. Let me point out the thing above before from last week, that I said that property law and rights would answer this question about the bright lights. It has nothing to do with the bottom line, or that it's looking at the environment. The property owner of a Wrigley Field had no right to be offensive and a nuisance to their neighbors. I don't need some international code to explain my property rights, and that I only have so much rights, and I have to stay within the bounds of not interfering with my neighbors at certain levels. Even the airport, who has the right to fly over your house, has policies to keep the engine thrust down while it's in certain areas. Yeah, maybe that's not a complete answer, but you see the balance is tried to be made with the needs of the relative property owners. I don't need an international basis for that, and there's none needed. There's no federal and international authority for that. It's state. But he creates this thesis and then says the thesis fails. To advance what? He's now linked to the stakeholder, the personage of the environment, to this situation. 3 fundamental questions now he wants to ask. If the separation thesis is false, well, he just said it was, so why are we even here? But this is how they do it to you. You'd be reading along thinking this is some really noble stuff. He's going through the analysis. All this has been chewing gum we've been doing, ready to blow a bubble. And smack in every chaw. It means he set up something, a thesis that was failed from the beginning. He did it so he could separate this thing out, create the opening that he's going to interject the personage of environment on everything you do, and then their right to control that and be the thing that they can use as a club, as a stakeholder, Guido. We're watching how this paper pulls this together to legitimize even this discussion. It really is a fascinating insight. I hope some of you, a few of you at least, will get this document and look through it. Again, I'm only looking from page 13 to 39. It is rich. This stuff is what you deal with. Even the military uses these things. So I mean, it doesn't matter where you're going to look. This is a universal imposition on us, as they admit, since the last 30, and in question still since the last 20 years. And we know, I mean, we can go back, but here's the fact of the working with it by these legitimized criminals. The mafia is legitimate just because it can knock on your door and demand money from you, and it can burn your place down when you don't pay them. That legitimized the mafia. And you know, under international law, that's the fact. I told you, never deny an authority that can affect you. The problem is they're using that as a legalism to break down and evade the law here. They're saying that the Guido from the mafia can do that because he can, just 'cause. These theories, failed or not, are not constitutional, not law, not enactment by law, not by a representative form of government, but de jure. It's de facto imposition over the de facto overthrow. Fundamental questions. In the separation thesis, if the separation thesis is false and business and the natural environment are as tightly conjoined as business as ethics, then at least 3 questions about how firms can or should address the environment in their decision making arise. So you see right here, you have not escaped the environmental connection that he now presents, not as the 3 questions, but as built on a false premise. He opens the door with the false premise, he creates the antithesis, and now he's got the solution, which is the outcome he wanted. This is outcome based. You're looking at the technique right here. It's a false thesis they throw on you. In other words, alternative dispute resolution. Those people didn't have a right to make the dispute, let alone the resolution, the alternative to the dispute. They were felons when they created that dispute, when they didn't have title or right to what you're doing. But here it is. Here we're going to create, upon a false question, we're going to question our own false thesis. And it's going to create 3 more questions. What have I said? Don't make a question out of a fact or a right. And here he's making 3 of them. And he's attached the stalking horse, or the Trojan horse, we could say, the environment, which is, again, not the environment you think it is. It's not the bunnies and the birds and the bees, but you've heard they use those different type of ones, and that's the thing that they're trying to protect, and they're not. You know, I was thinking about, the water protectors, and I don't mean any disrespect, that we all have to have fresh water, but, when you look at the truth of all that, the water protectors that are up in North Dakota don't sound to me any different, and the implementation is no different than the water keepers that are everywhere that are destroying our lives. I forgot to mention that. Water keepers, you got to look around. Water keepers are everywhere. They're this problem. They just came under a different name because it's more acceptable to people when you see it that way. And they get you to agree that that's what you should do. And who is going to argue against good, clean water? I mean, in an all right mind. I'm not, but the point is, I'm not arguing against that, am I? When you really listen to what I'm saying. We have water keepers everywhere, and they're criminals. And we don't get the type of environment that we actually need. In fact, they disregard it, and they use these rules against us. They don't take care of mankind's environment in their natural imposition of the stakeholder criminal. That you can't get there from here. For our first question, is it permissible for firms to contribute resources to environmental efforts? I should just read without any further discussion on these questions. You see, but now the environment becomes part of the thing the firm is obligated and has to, not obligation, they didn't talk about that, the duties in order to mitigate. Now it's part of the discussion. They use a false thesis, then create a question of whether or not it exists to create the door that allows the false questions of whether or not the firms is it permissible for firms. Why wouldn't it be if a firm decided to do that? But they make a question out of it. But we're not talking about the natural environment. We're talking about the natural environment as constructed by these types of people that have decided that as criminals they have a say in your stuff and doings. Again, I was going to say, they keep referencing this the admittedly failed separation thesis. Let's go on to question 2. Is it consistent with existing laws for firms to contribute resources to environmental efforts? Why is that even a question? Of course not. Why do they make it a question? Why? Because they want to keep driving the fact this environment has some kind of thing that's a percentage, a demand it can make. They're trying to drive home that it could have this. And you can believe it, and you can accept it by your cricketness, or you can call it out for the nonsense that it is. The third question is, could it be considered mandatory for firms to contribute resources to the environmental efforts? This is another step up now. Could it be considered mandatory? Now we see the club coming out. Just 'cause. So they set you up in the first 2 that it wouldn't be a question at all. Now they're saying, can we make this mandatory? In what? Because we're Guido and we can do it without the law. Remember, this all comes without the law. It comes as people being willing to be Guidos to justify their legitimacy in the mafia against anybody that they've got their sights on. That the stakeholder they are now in status now has a seat in your kitchen, has a seat in your checkbook, has a seat at your decision making, all because just because they're legitimate they can do this because they can just do it. We now see in this discussion the transition where now environment, as they say it without actual defining it, they even put the word natural. You know how phony the word natural now is on your products, right? When you do this, the word natural is useless to us. And it doesn't, this natural environment is the natural legalism environment, and their environment is one of felony imposition, and we also see where it relates to the laws of the United States and the evasion of that. That is the treason. Not only do we have the Bar Association become an oppressor, an overthrower, and commit the war against us, in the overthrow, it allowed the door to be opened for the treason now to allow another oppressor to come in that they are in league with. Now with this imposition, they now come up in this statement, the three guiding principles. Now remember before we talked, and I kind of went by it, they talked about the fact that there was no decisive decision. The decision is the management makes is irrespective of the bottom line. In fact, when you go to the UN, they now have a triple bottom line, which are all respectful to the environment. So they dismissed business and the bottom line when in fact they're going to promote that, but it's a different type of bottom line after they've gone through the process of conforming your mind to accept a stalking horse stakeholder just 'cause. The guiding principles that you can read in this document here on this next thing, the answers to these questions, such as those of above, indicate the environmental responsibility on part of the firm is desirable. Well, of course it is. They're pushing their outcome, aren't they? But are those questions relevant? Well, two of them absolutely weren't. One was a threat. Why? Because they made the theory that they can do so. They can come in and break your knees, the threat to break your knees, and if you stand up against them, they can get you again, just for the fact that you resisted something that they've determined is ethical. The firms are obligated to attend to the environment now. Out of this change, now you see now the firms are obligated. That's number two. Nature of the firm's obligations is generally discretionary. Now what have they done? They brought it into the administrative side again. There's no liability on discretionary acts. So now they're saying you can be a criminal and you're not going to be held accountable. This is a message to the managers or the people that are inside saying, okay, if you keep it in making decisions in discretionary authority already given to you, you can't be touched. They're showing them now how to put the shield up in order to allow them to be the guy that threatens to break your knees if you don't pay what they want. And I think I want to end there. There's a lot more to go here. On and on. This is just to me, this was just an expose on how they do it to us. I hope it's not, I hope you're finding some value in it because it's what I use all the time. Thank you very much for tuning in today. We'll leave it right there. I'll touch this again next week. We have just a few more pages and I'll be moving on probably with something else. Thank you, Grimner, and what you do at Real Liberty Media, the Blogcaster page there, and the podcasts and the archives, and Bo Diddy and you with the Freedoms Network, a social network. Appreciate that you offer that to people, and then people can interact. Not that I'm too active in it all, but I know it could be used as a great tool to get together to be really functional. I hope one day that see that to start. And Jules, simulcasting the broadcast, I do appreciate it. Folks, anybody else that sees openings on other broadcasts for the 2 hours that I do the broadcast, I know I don't have any commercials, but maybe you can ask other broadcasters just to simulcast, and it'll just be the special time that they promote as advertisement free. And we just get this word out. I hope people are listening for cause and effect and resolve and beyond. Then thank you to the terrestrial broadcasters for what you do. Get it out to people that are still using the civil defense method on regular radio. So thank you very much, and I'll be here next week. Tech, diffs, and nature, real nature, the heart-pumping, spirit-driven nature that I live by, I hope. Try to very much. I'll be here next week.
Well, that's another lesson. I hope with today's information you can take it to those that misbehave. From behind the woodshed, leaving his mark on the beast, this is Hal Anthony. Till next time, journey with purpose.
Opening up a can of whoop-ass feels like.
Son, you just opened a whole case of whoop-ass.